There is a house on the edge of a quiet street in a city that has long since grown too large and too fast around it. It is not a grand house. It never was. 3 bedrooms, a small garden out back that someone once loved, a kitchen where the walls are the color of old tea, and the window above the sink looks out at a tree that was planted the year the youngest child was born. The house is full of things, decades of things, stacked with the accumulated weight of a family that lived, loudly and completely, inside these walls for 30 years. But the family is gone now. And the man who built all of it, who laid every brick of it not with his hands, but with his years, his wages, his silence, his sacrifice, sits alone in the front room every evening in the same chair. His name is Bashir. He is 67 years old, and if you were to sit beside him in that chair and ask him how he was, truly ask him, the way people rarely do, he would think for a long time before he answered. And then he would say, fine. Because Bashir has spent his entire life answering fine when the true answer was something too large and too old and too complicated to put into a single word. This is the story of what Bashir built, and of what was done with it, and of what karma, patient, unhurried, incapable of forgetting, did next. Bashir arrived in England from Pakistan in 1981. He was 23 years old with a second-hand suitcase, 200 pounds borrowed from his uncle, and an address written on a folded piece of paper for a cousin's flat in Bradford where he could sleep on the floor until he found his feet. He found them quickly. Not through luck, Bashir did not believe in luck. He believed in showing up earlier than anyone else and leaving later. He believed in doing the job that needed doing without waiting to be asked. He believed, with a quiet and unshakable certainty, that a man's worth was measured in what he built, not what he said. He found work in a textile factory within a week. Hard work, poorly paid, the kind of work that leaves residue on your hands that no amount of washing fully removes. He did not complain. He sent money home to his mother in Lahore every month without fail, even in the months when it meant eating less himself. He met Zarina 3 years after arriving. She had come over to join her own family, a small and fierce woman from Gujranwala with black eyes and a laugh that could be heard from 3 houses down and opinions she was never afraid to share. They were introduced by a mutual relative, married within the year, and set up their first home in 2 rented rooms above a laundrette on a street that smelled permanently of fabric softener. It was not comfortable, but Bashir did not measure a home by its comfort. He measured it by what happened inside it. And inside those 2 rooms, in the first years of their marriage, something warm and real was being built. Zarina was pregnant with Imran by the end of the first year. Nadia came 2 years after, and Bashir, looking at his 2 small children in the cramped rooms above the laundrette, made a decision that would define the next 4 decades of his life. He decided that his children would never want for anything that he could provide. Not comfort, not education, not opportunity, not the feeling, the particular foundational feeling of being supported completely by the person who loved them most. It was not a dramatic decision. He did not announce it. He simply folded it into himself and got on with the work of making it true. He changed jobs from the factory to a minicab company where the hours were longer but the pay was better. He drove nights and weekends. He slept in shifts. Zarina managed the household with the efficiency and love of a woman who understood exactly what her husband was doing and why, and who matched his sacrifice with her own in different currency, the school runs, the homework, the meals made from very little, the children held steady in a home that was always warm even when the money was thin. By the time Imran was 10 and Nadia was 8, they had saved enough for a deposit on the house. The house on the quiet street, the one with the kitchen window that looks out at the tree. The day they got the keys, Bashir stood in the empty front room and put his hand on the wall and stood there for a long moment without speaking. Zarina asked him what he was doing. "Just feeling it," he said. She understood. You do not have to explain a thing like that to someone who was there for every year of the earning. Imran was, from childhood, the kind of boy who collected ambition the way other children collected football cards. He was sharp, genuinely sharp, and he knew it, and Bashir nurtured that sharpness with every resource he had. Tutors when they could afford them and books when they couldn't. A computer when computers were still expensive enough that buying one meant 3 months of tighter belts. University application fees, accommodation deposits, a monthly allowance that Bashir managed by quietly taking on extra shifts and never once mentioning that he had done so. Imran graduated with a degree in engineering. He got a job in London within a month of finishing. He came home for Eid and called on birthdays and at Christmas, and was, in all the visible ways, a good son. But the calls became shorter. The visits became less frequent. The years passed in the way that years do when someone is busy building their own life, and the people who built theirs are simply assumed. Still there, still fine, still waiting. Nadia was different in temperament, softer, more openly affectionate, the child who had always been quicker with a hug and more vocal about her love. She had studied to become a teacher, had married a man named Faisal, whom Bashir liked immediately, and had settled in Manchester, 2 hours away by train. She visited more than Imran. But visiting and being present are not always the same thing. Nadia's visits were full of noise and warmth and the beautiful chaos of her 2 small children, Bashir's grandchildren, whom he adored, and in that noise and warmth, Bashir was loved. But he was also, in some way that he could not quite name and would never say out loud, peripheral. He was the backdrop, the steady, permanent backdrop against which the main events of other people's lives played out. And then Zarina became ill. The diagnosis came on an ordinary Tuesday. Cancer, caught late, the kind of news that rearranges everything in an instant. Imran flew up from London for a weekend. Nadia came with the children and stayed for a week. There were phone calls and tears and the collective gathering of a family around a crisis. And then the crisis became a long illness. Weeks became months. The phone calls settled into their earlier frequency. The visits shortened. Life for everyone else resumed. And Bashir cared for Zarina alone. For 18 months, he was her nurse, her companion, her cook, her driver, her memory when her memory failed her, her courage when hers wavered. He did it without complaint. Without asking for help, he wasn't offered. Without once making his children feel guilty for living their lives at a distance. Zarina died on a Wednesday morning in April. Bashir was holding her hand. He called Imran first, then Nadia. Then he sat in the kitchen, in the chair he had always sat in, and he looked out at the tree in the garden, the one that was planted the year Nadia was born. It was beginning to bloom. He sat there for a very long time, and in the silence of that kitchen, in the house he had spent 40 years earning, he felt something he had never quite allowed himself to feel before. The full weight of how alone he was. The year after Zarina's death was the loneliest year of Bashir's life. Not because his children were cruel. They were not. They called. They visited on birthdays. Imran sent money sometimes, unnecessary money. Bashir had his pension and the house was paid off years ago, sent in the way that money is sometimes sent when the person doing the sending knows that what is actually needed cannot be transferred electronically. But the house was quiet in a way it had never been. Zarina had filled it, not just with her presence, but with her particular quality of attention, her awareness of everyone around her, the way a room became more itself when she was in it. Without her, the walls seemed further apart. The kitchen window looked out at the tree, and the tree was just a tree. Bashir began to disappear in small ways. He stopped cooking proper meals, not from incapacity, but from the absence of purpose that comes when there is no one to cook for. He slept late, which he had never done in his life. He sat in the front room in the evenings in the chair and watched television programs he could not afterwards remember watching. A neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Hartley, who had lived next door for 20 years, was the one who noticed. She began bringing food over. A casserole on Tuesdays, a loaf of bread. Small, practical acts of care that she performed without ceremony and which Bashir received with a gratitude he found difficult to express. "You should tell your children you're struggling," she said to him once, directly, the way older women sometimes are direct when they have decided that politeness has run out of usefulness. "They are busy," Bashir said. Mrs. Hartley gave him a long look. "They are always busy," she said. "That is not the same as too busy." Bashir did not reply. But he thought about it. He thought about it for several months, turning it over in the way he turned over all difficult things, quietly, internally, without troubling anyone else with the process. And then Imran called on a Sunday, one of his shorter calls, between a football match and a dinner reservation, and asked how Bashir was, and Bashir said fine, and Imran said good, and the call lasted 9 minutes. After he hung up, Bashir sat with the phone in his hand for a long time. 9 minutes. He had driven minicabs for 12 years, through nights and weekends and the long grinding hours that steal years from a person, so that Imran could go to university and not have to worry about money. 9 minutes. He put the phone down, he went to bed, and something inside him, something that had been bending under the weight of being taken for granted for many years, quietly, finally, broke. Bashir was not a man who expressed himself easily in words. He had spent his life expressing himself in actions, in the mortgage payments and the school fees, and the 18 months of caring for Zarina, and the 40 years of showing up without being asked. Words for Bashir had always felt insufficient. Actions were the language he trusted. But actions were no longer enough. So on a Sunday night in November, 3 months after Zarina's death, he sat down at the kitchen table with a pen and paper, and he wrote. Not a letter of anger, not an accusation. Bashir did not have anger in him, not toward his children. He had only the thing that lives just underneath anger in people who love deeply and are quietly overlooked, something closer to sorrow, to the particular exhaustion of a love that has given everything and been received as ordinary. He wrote to both Imran and Nadia together, and he wrote the truth, calmly, clearly, with the same steadiness he had brought to everything in his life. He wrote about coming to England at 23 with 200 borrowed pounds, about the factory and the minicab nights and the years when he ate less so they could have more, about the house, the deposit saved coin by coin, the mortgage paid through double shifts, about Zarina's illness and the 18 months he had spent being everything she needed and asking nothing of anyone. He wrote about the 9-minute phone call, not to shame Imran, he was careful about that, but to show him, to make the thing visible that had for too long been invisible, in the way that the people who hold things together are always invisible until they stop. He wrote, I am not writing this because I am angry. I am writing this because I am tired, not tired of loving you. I will love you until the last day I breathe. Tired of feeling like the love only flows in one direction. Tired of being fine when I am not fine. Tired of waiting for a call that comes for 9 minutes between a match and a dinner and then is gone. And then, At the end, he wrote something he had never said to either of them in their adult lives, something he had assumed they knew, in the way parents assume children know the things they have never been told. He wrote, "I built this home for you, every brick of it, in every way a home can be built. I would do it again, without hesitation. But I need you to know that the man who built it is still here, still in the front room, still in the kitchen, still looking out at the tree, and he would very much like his children to remember that he exists, not on birthdays, not in emergencies, just ordinarily, the way he was always, ordinarily, there for you." He folded the letter, put it in 2 envelopes, posted them both the next morning, and then he came home, made tea, and sat in the kitchen in the ordinary Tuesday silence and waited. Nadia called the same day her letter arrived. She was crying before she finished saying his name, not politely crying, properly crying, in the way of someone who has just had something shown to them that they cannot unsee and cannot explain away. "Baba," she said, I didn't know. I didn't know you felt like this. Why didn't you tell me?" "I am telling you now," Bashir said. She drove up the following Saturday, without Faisal, without the children, just herself, the way she had come to him as a small girl when something needed to be said privately. She sat across from him at the kitchen table, and she listened, really listened, without defending herself, without explaining the busyness, without doing any of the things people do when they are more interested in not feeling guilty than in understanding what they have done. She just listened. And when he had finished, when the 40 years of quiet and the 18 months of caring alone and the 9-minute phone calls and all of it had finally been said out loud in the kitchen where it belonged, she reached across the table and took his hands. Old hands. Worn hands, the hands that had driven through the nights and held her mother at the end and built every ordinary thing she had ever taken for granted. She held them for a long time without speaking. Imran was harder. His call came 4 days after the letter. Shorter than Nadia's. More defended. There was explanation, the pressure of his job, the demands of his own family, the difficulty of the last year. All of it real, none of it wrong exactly. But Bashir listened to all of it and then said, quietly, "I know you are busy, son. I have always known. I am not asking you to be less busy. I am asking you to give your father 10 minutes of your week that feel like you mean them." There was a long silence on the phone. And then Imran said, "I'm sorry, Baba." 3 words, simply said. They were enough to begin with. Karma in this story does not arrive as catastrophe. There is no dramatic ruin, no public humiliation, no moment where the ungrateful are brought to their knees by the universe's accounting. Because karma is not always fire. Sometimes karma is a letter on a Tuesday morning that makes a grown man sit at his own kitchen table and cry. Sometimes it is the moment you pick up the phone to call your father and realize with the cold clarity of true recognition that you do not know what he had for dinner last night or last week or last month. That the man who knew everything about your life is a man whose life you have been living beside without actually seeing. That is the karma in this story. The slow interior reckoning of children who were given everything and forgot to look at the hands that gave it. Imran began calling every Sunday. Not 9 minutes, real calls, the kind where you ask and then wait for the actual answer. He came home for a long weekend in December. He sat with his father in the front room and they watched a match together, and Bashir made tea, and neither of them said anything particularly significant, and it was, in its quiet ordinariness, everything. Nadia started a new tradition. Every month, one Saturday, just her and her father, sometimes in the house. sometimes a drive somewhere. Small, consistent, unhurried time that asked nothing dramatic of either of them except presence. Mrs. Hartley still brings the casserole on Tuesdays. Bashir has started cooking properly again. The tree in the garden is fully in bloom.